Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and yesterday there was another small balance update for Dota Underlords after the big Outlanders update, so let's get right into it. Here in the general section, we have mostly just UI and bug fixes. There's a little bit of a detail about added some UI to signal that heroes from your initial knockout crew sell for 0 gold, and I know this was a point that was very confusing, very not intuitive, that you had a unit that you couldn't sell for any gold, but you could still sell it. It was led to some weird situations where you'd sell it off and like, oh, I know I don't have gold. But now there's a little icon there to show that you won't get any gold for that. So hopefully you won't make that mistake quite as much. Okay, on to the actual balance changes. Talent changes for Enneses. Sharp Pain. The damage increase to pure pain was reduced from 100% increased damage to down to 50% increased damage. That is a massive nerf to pure pain, or sharp pain rather. Instead of doing twice as much damage, it's only doing 150% more damage. And that was probably the go-to talent that everyone just automatically default picked on that tier. So it's good to see that kind of brought in more in line, and some of the other ones may see a little bit more play because of that. And Enneses was honestly just a little bit too popular, especially at the higher level lobbies. You'd frequently see 7 or 8 players all playing Enneses in kind of the higher Lord lobbies and the tournament lobbies. So good to see her taken down just a little bit. And also Sympathy Pains, another very important part of that build. One of the later talents says the extra target from Pure Pain no longer takes full damage. Instead, it now takes only 50% of the damage. And once again, that's another huge nerf to this Sympathy Pain, Sharp Pain combo build. And I think it's justified. I honestly think that Enneses really just was too incredibly strong in the long fights. Once she got up to near maximum hype from just, the fight dragging on for a little while, if she didn't get killed or, pudge hooked or something like that, then she'd get maximum hype. She has a lot of cooldown reduction, and she'd just be spamming out Sharp Pain constantly, or Pure Pain rather, constantly. It would go to 2 targets, hit for a bunch of damage, it's all pure damage, and I would frequently see in the late game fights Enneses being the top damage dealer, despite you having, other strong damage dealers on your composition. Frequently, if the fight went long enough, she would top the DPS charts, and that just really shouldn't happen for like a healing focused Underlord, at least in my opinion, compared to say somebody like Hobgen, who's all about the DPS and no healing. Enneses topping the DPS chart was a little bit too much. So hopefully that becomes a little bit better point of balance between Enneses and Hobgen, and I know I personally have been trying out Hobgen a lot more now that that particular build has been nerfed. Okay, on to the hero changes. Lich, his Chain Frost cooldown has been increased from 10-8-6 seconds up to 15-13-10 seconds, as if you're ever going to get a 3-star Lich. I think this is, it's a fair nerf. I think Lich was, I'm a little bit less excited about this nerf. I think mages get nerfed a little bit further down, and, Lich as an ace unit is supposed to be a big impactful unit to add to your board, and dramatically increasing his cooldown really means he gets, instead of 2 casts off, he's going to get 1 if he gets burst, and it's going to be very hard for him to get a second cooldown off. Maybe at 2-star he'll get 2 of them off, but it's very unlikely he'll ever get 3, even in a longer fight. That just doesn't seem very likely. So, I wouldn't say this is going to kill the unit. Obviously, you're still going to pick it up if you're playing mages, but it's just going to feel a little bit worse to pick that up, and a little bit less of a big payoff to pick up the Lich, as opposed to the other magic damage dealers like Keeper of the Light, Morphling, Storm Spirit, or Puck. But onto some buffs. Necrophos, his Death Pulse, the cooldown has been reduced from 7.5 seconds down to 5 seconds, letting him spam out that ability a whole lot more often. And this means that he's probably going to want to use a mana item a lot more often. Something like a Brooch of the Aggressor is going to move up in priority. You should want to pick up Brooch of the Aggressor a little bit higher, put it on the Necrophos, so that he can actually take advantage of this shorter cooldown. Otherwise, if you don't have a mana item or, say, a human synergy or something, he's going to go those 5 seconds and then not have enough mana to actually cast the ability, making this cooldown change kind of irrelevant. But I think it's a really good change. I think Necrophos kind of fell off the map once he went into the Healer Alliance. He's still a good unit, has a high impact, but his alliance has just never really worked out, and rather than change his alliance, I like just seeing his ability buffed up a little bit. Next up, Snapfire, one of the newest units, has been substantially reduced in damage output. The damage change from 150, 250, 450 was really ridiculously strong with the Dragon Mortimer Kisses, down to 100, 150, 200, and that's a rather substantial drop-off. You're losing 50 damage at tier 1, 100 at tier 2, and 250 at tier 3. But to be fair, she was pretty ridiculously good at her release version. This was way too much damage. So the new values, I think, are much more in line with what you'd expect out of a 1-cost unit. So it becomes a point where she's a really good early unit. As a 1-cost unit, you get her to 2-star. You can run with her for a while, but unless you get her up to 3-star, you really want to move on from her for something bigger and better. Say, replace her with a Dragon Knight later on in the game in order to still keep your Dragon bonus. Or if you have 4 Inventors, you get really late in the game and then you replace it with a Gyrocopter or a Techies or some Ace unit who's an Inventor if you want to keep your 4 Inventors. But she's no longer going to be always going to keep her even at 2-star for the whole game. Storm Spirit, another new unit who was very, very too strong on release. His damage output was identical at tier 1, at level 1, from 70 DPS or 70 damage for Ball Lightning to 70 damage, and still plus 10. At 2-star, it's been reduced from 140 down to 120 damage, but the gain per cell traveled is still the same, so that's a relatively minor nerf. Each cast is going to deal 20 less damage, so it's really not much when the cast is overall doing in the range of 200 damage, something like that, to the furthest targets, rather. So losing 20 damage is a small nerf, but it's not completely gutted by any means. At tier 3, though, at 3-star, that's a big change. You're going to drop off by 75 damage initially, and you lose 10 per square traveled. So that's, really losing about 100 damage, so 25 to 30% of your overall damage output at tier 3 or 3-star is going away. So you don't want to put that high of a priority on Storm Spirit to 3-star anymore. Honestly, I've had good success running him with 2 2-star copies, because then you have an extra Spirit to possibly trigger the Spirit Alliance if you have the Spirit Alliance going. Otherwise, you can get him a 2-star, and then if he's uncontested, maybe put him up to 3-star, but otherwise I wouldn't worry too terribly much about getting him all the way up to 3-star. Another big change, Venomancer is now a Savage Scaled Warlock. Well, it makes sense, he's a snake kind of thing, and snakes have scales, so why not make him a Scaled? And this is kind of another indirect nerf to mages, as another Scaled is now more readily available, but it's also a buff to Venomancer, who has been through some ups and downs, kind of fell off the map recently whenever the Savage changes removed the summons, and then he got a relatively low impact ability. And then Savage and Warlock in particular were both just really weak, and really weak to mage damage, magic damage, burst damage as well, because they couldn't very easily fit in a scaled bonus. It would take a lot of units outside of your normal combo between Savage, Warlocks, Druids often would go into that, and you just struggle to get scaled in. But now with Venomancer being scaled, it's a lot more realistic to get scaled online early game, or to just throw in an extra Tidehunter or Medusa in the late game to complete up that alliance. So good change, put a higher priority on Venomancer going forward. Witch Doctor, Paralyzing Cask. The bounces have been reworked a little bit, where he now gets 1 more bounce at 1-star, is identical at 2-star, and then loses a bounce at 3-star. And overall, I think that is a nerf to him, because very rarely are you going to play him at 1-star, and more often than not you're playing him at 2 or possibly 3-star. So at 3-star, it's not that big of an appeal. But more importantly, the cooldown has been changed from 15 seconds down to 10 seconds. That is a really big change, and I think this puts Witch Doctor right up into S tier. I really do, because Witch Doctor having a 10-second cooldown plus the 7 bounces at 2-star means he's going to be locking down people for a very long time, very consistently. Kind of how we saw Shadow Shaman go from the worst unit in the game to pretty strong whenever his cooldown got reduced from 10 seconds down to 8 seconds, because it just allowed for a much greater overlap. If you're going to be hexing somebody for 6 seconds on an 8-second cooldown, that's much more impactful. You can basically cut their time not hexed in half. And here it's kind of the same deal with Paralyzing Cask. The bounces are going to be stunning people for 5 or 6 seconds as they bounce around, or maybe even more. And this cooldown reduction means that he has a much higher uptime percentage on the stuns. So I'd put a very high priority on Witch Doctor now. I think him with Trolls and Warlocks are going to be a very potent force, especially in the early and mid game, if you can get him up to 2-star. All right, on to some of the bigger changes of the alliances, and we've got the Mage Alliance has been rather substantially nerfed from 40% and 100% at 3 and 6 mages down to 25 and 75. That seems really big on paper, a really big nerf. You essentially are going to lose every 100 damage, you're going to lose 15 damage output. So if you would previously do 100 damage, you'd then do 140, and now you're only doing 125. So an impactful nerf for sure. And this is kind of paired with the scaled adjustment down here. We're going to skip down to the bottom here. With the scaled, magic resist has also been nerfed from 30% and 50% resistance to 20%, 45% resistance. I think these pairings basically keep mage versus scaled as essentially an even matchup. If your opponent has mage and you have scaled, well, 2 scaled at least, then you're kind of still on equal footing, where the same amount of damage output is coming as before. But mages are definitely much weaker against non-scaled compositions because they just have less bonus initially. And I like that adjustment because I think mages were just too strong against most compositions. They were top of the meta for sure, always an S tier composition. You'd often see 2 or 3 people going to fort every single game in the higher tier lobbies. So, and the only counterplay there was get scaled. It was get scaled or die. And that never felt great. You never really felt like you had too many options around that. It was, I have to get scaled because mages are good and mages are present in the lobby. And seeing them knocked down means that scaled is no longer an absolute requirement. If you just have a strong build that doesn't incorporate scaled, you can still keep pace with mages, whereas before you just absolutely had to have scaled no matter what. So seeing this toned down, I think is very acceptable, and I played around with it a bunch for the past day. This is why this patch notes is a little bit late. Is I really didn't know how this was going to impact the meta, and it seems like it put mages into a better spot, balance-wise, where you might see 1, maybe 2 people going for mages per game, but you're not going to see 3 or 4. And that's where a strategy should be, I think, on average, is 1, maybe 2 people, and in a really anomalous game, you get 3 people going for it. So I like the change. I think it's acceptable, and I think this brings a lot more balance to the game than we've seen before, at least in terms of the meta. The Primordials, which is a common pairing with mages, has also been nerfed. Lost some armor at every level from 5-10-10 to 3-5-8, and the health total has been nerfed at 3-star Eidolons. So 6 Primordials is probably dead. They've been gutted over and over again. Initially, they used to have 15 armor and the 2400 HP. Now they're down to 8 armor and 1800 HP. So the 3-star Primordials are really weak, or 3-star Eidolons rather. I would not really work on pursuing 6 Primordials anytime soon. I think that build is effectively dead. I don't want to say they're completely out of the meta, but this is a real big hit to them, especially whenever one of their biggest points of power was Enneses and her Sharp Pain, because the Primordials kind of lacked damage output, and Enneses Sharp Pain Pure Pain combo was really good at dealing damage. So to see both those kind of nerfed, I would try to avoid 6 Primordials if possible. And to fill the void of 6 Primordials and mages kind of going down in priority, Savages and Warlocks have been boosted up. Savages gain a little bit more damage per attack from 3-6-12 to 4-7-15. So Savages are much better early game. That's a rather substantial buff, 3 up to 4, 6 up to 7 for every attack that they do. And also Warlocks have got their duration increased at 4 Warlocks, up from 2 seconds to 2, 3, 3.5. So I think this is a really big power point at 4 Warlocks, where you can get a 3-second duration on the link, the lifesteal link. So I would love to put a high priority on Warlocks, Savages as well. So I think Venomancer, Witch Doctor, what are the other Warlocks? Mr. Warlock, and just Shadow Fiend, Disruptor, all of them are going to be much higher priority now in this new meta. I really think that 4 Warlocks is going to be a very good combo coming into this new meta, especially with a weakened mages, so they can't quite burst everybody down so quickly, so you get a chance to heal up. And if you get 4 Warlocks with Disruptor, then you're going to heal so incredibly much over those 3 seconds of duration. Shadow Fiend as well, very high priority for Warlock builds. So that's it. That really shakes up the meta even more after the Outlanders update, and playing with it over the past day, I really think the meta's in a great spot. I think this is probably the closest to balance I've seen. There's not really any strategy that seems head and shoulders above the rest, with, with the kind of the lowest performing alliances, the Savage and the Warlocks brought up, the highest performing, the Mages brought down. Assassins are still really good. Knights got recently buffed, so whenever the jail cooperates, they're strong. Scrappy's got a couple new units, so they've got some ability to play. I really just think a lot of things are very viable. There's no clear-cut top tier and bottom tier units or alliances. It seems like we're in a good spot for balance. So hope you enjoy it, and I like this meta a lot, and I will see you next time and in future videos. Thank you so much for watching.